With Sage and Bob, and we're just going to go into some dialogues about different practices of, different understandings of how to stay rooted in the self or in presence, however we describe this.
Yeah.
Just one's own experience.
I think something interesting that I've been experiencing lately is like this standard of having to do something, like as if doing nothing isn't right.
Yeah.
Like hearing, for example, like what'd you do this summer? And if I say nothing, it's like, oh, what's wrong? Why didn't you do anything? Like, that's not good. As if that's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. That's been like a reoccurring theme lately that I've been noticing. I remember like my brother like talking about how he doesn't do anything, and my mom being like, well, why don't we go do this, and then you can put that on your list of things you've done. It's like
yeah. Well, these bodies are kind of directional, our little feet kind of point forward, and our little grabbers, they're out in front of us, and our heads will, our senses are directional, more or less. We're not just this turret, so it's pretty natural for the body to get involved in doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing that really needs to change about that.
Yeah.
The question is if we're doing, what do we want out of this doing?
Mm-hmm.
Ramana Maharshi says that, basically self-realization occurs out of our own efforts, that basically there's something, that the ego is being asked, admittedly is being asked to inquire into its own veracity, its own truth, So...
That does seem to be a point of a challenge. Like, a lot of people can get conceptually what you just said, but then the life has to be lived.
Yes.
Then how do I make money becomes, like, all of these things that are practical become a challenge to the person who's realizing that they're just consciousness and they don't really have any desires per se, but they have to keep participating in action.
Yeah. Well, that just kind of happens, doesn't it? The idea that could be examined is who is this I that thinks that he's living the life? Or is the ego living the life, or is it just kind of commenting on what's happening while it's happening? A person could look at that and see what's so.
Mm-hmm. Has there been a particular point for you where something maybe just fell away, like whatever that noise of the commentary is?
It's like nothing needs to change, and there have been, epiphanies and great experiences, but just like all experience, those events came and they went, and all that's really left of them is just a record or in the mind.
I had an interesting experience the night before last night. I was at a coffee shop and there was an open mic night, and there was a bunch of people I knew, and it was like a lot of social thought and intention going on. Like a girl I really like, and talking to her and figuring that out and all that.
That'll get
and
your
it's
attention.
It's like this whole story of all these things that make up an identity that I take on, and all these things that seem so important as they're passing through me and I'm experiencing them. And then because it was a school night, my mom wanted me home, and so I had to leave. And I was all of a sudden isolated, and I was driving home, and all that was left was this residue of all these thoughts and things I was trying to do with all these people, and all of a sudden I was alone, and all I could do, and all that was happening was my mind was telling me about that stuff again. And so, and it started to kind of make me feel a little bit weird and unsettled, because it was like I care so much about all these people, and I love them so much, and I have all these intentions with them, and these things that I want, and these things that I think I'm doing, and then I can remember all the events of the day, but where are they? I remember them happening right now as this is happening, but the reality of it just went away as the event passed away. It's like remembering a dream. And so it leaves you to look at what is making it real. And it's that unmistakable factor that's always there.
Yeah,
And it happens to be you. Yeah. Happens to be your own being. And instead of giving that being to all these thoughts, and I was finding myself not being able, I would think about that, and then I'd be like, okay, but what does that mean? Like, the thoughts aren't real, and then I'm just thinking more, and I was like, wait, what's actually making all of that real? Why was that event real when it passed through? And it's like, what I was dealing with was this disturbance of like wanting to hold on to the events of the day as they pass through, as if it was actually there's actual events happening in succession that I could hold on to.
And that's basically predicated on the belief that if things aren't the way we envision they should be, it's like that I'm not whole and complete, or the experience isn't whole and complete in some way. And this, the self-inquiry, as Ramana advocates it, is basically based on, an actual looking and seeing if there's anything here that's really not whole and complete.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Things keep happening no matter what.
Right. In all of our language, we think in language, and language, all of our language is a language of experience, and experiences all come and go. So, of course, if we got stuck in one experience, it would be just like freeze frame. Yeah, okay. But there's this movement that's going on with the body and the mind and all of that. But then the self-inquiry is basically, out of what is all this arising? What is real? What lens, as you beautifully asked, what makes this real? What makes us, believe that it's real? Yeah, so we can look at that, and there's this grokking or knowing that's basically unavoidable when you look. You'll discover that we're not what we take ourselves to be. Right. We're completely beyond that, and we include all of this phenomenal activity, of course, but we're not just the sum total of all of that. We're I don't like to. I guess it's in Advaita parlance. You wouldn't want to say other, but we're not different than anything. It's there again. Language just breaks down.
Right. It's hard to try and say it, because then a lot of the time two people will be saying the same thing in different ways.
Right.
Not listening to each other's way of saying it, and then they think they're disagreeing.
Right.
But what you were saying about trying to realize the self, and then also worry about providing. It's interesting because it's not like nothing's gonna happen. It's like there's like this idea that if you don't go out and get food, that you're gonna die, but you don't really put any more thought into it. If I were to just sit here, things wouldn't stop happening. It would still continue.
But sometimes people do reach a point where they become debilitated and they can't go to work because they're so removed from being able to just function that they kind of go into what I would call like a spiritual crisis. They can't go work at McDonald's because they can't be around people.
Right.
And so what happens through my own experience is one has to find some way to integrate when it comes to working and going and showing up on time. Like for me, I joined the Army and I had to fulfill a 3.5-year contract. And when it became unreal for me to be there, which was many times, but I remember 6 months before the contract was up, I wanted to leave. And then I had to sit down and do self-inquiry very, very, with all of my being, with Ramana, just asking him, why can't I leave? And he said, from within, the answer came through the inquiry, leave what? what does it matter if you're here or
Right.
there? You're here in the self.
Right.
But that had to be seen, and that wasn't easy
Right.
because I was packing, and I was already thinking of driving
Right.
out down the road.
Right. And this all has to do with self-concern, with I guess, I don't believe in the big S and the little s, but, there's this concern with this me, which is a learned thing. What am I, that we believe that there's something here that's separate, that's basically that there's something that's at risk, that, can do the wrong thing somehow. And for sure, there can be discomfort as a result of action. That's true. But basically what we do is we mistake our survival mechanism for being the truth of who we are. And, all of the things we're talking about, getting to work on time, making money, keeping commitments, keeping agreements, is all about the person, the persona, and how it's operating in the world. If you look up the word persona in the dictionary, I believe one of the lesser, I've seen it different in different dictionaries, but one of the things I found in one dictionary was that it actually means mask. And it's like I think it's from the Greek or old Spanish or something, but anyway, it's like you can picture a Renaissance party with people with a mask on a stick, and you're putting in front of it, and I'm this mask, you can't see what's behind the mask, but here I am, and this mask is who I am, and don't you dare question or try and get past this mask, because this is what I want you to believe that I am. And we do this, and we're taught to do it to the point that we believe that we're the mask as well. So this case of a limited identity is based on basically imagining ourselves in a way that is limited, and therefore has something at stake in this game. And we may have to go through zero, and there may be times when we have spiritual crises, but finally you won't be able, I posit that a person won't be able to not do the needful, that the needful, what's actually needed, will happen.
Yes.
Yeah, you'll continue to breathe, you'll find food, you'll find shelter, you'll find some clothes to wear for that day. It may not.
Things keep happening.
Well, the consciousness itself is intelligent.
Yes.
And it's very practical.
Right.
It's not. It can be mystical. It can be all things, of course.
Right.
But a lot of people in this spiritual search, so to speak, tend to want to lean towards the mystical. Like everything is about finding a way of living that avoids just doing the dishes, just taking out the trash, just doing a simple job in order to provide. If you look at someone like even Papaji, he was there at Ramana Ashram. He said, I don't want to go back to my family. That's a dream.
Right.
And Ramana said, if it's a dream, what are you afraid of?
Right, yeah.
So he went back and he provided for 35 relatives, and he did simple jobs. He worked in forests, he had been in the army, all of these things. But I've found that it's rare, it's more rare to find somebody that's fully established in that knowingness and realization to be fully in the practical,
Well, we think in absolutes, I think when we actually, you can't gain the self, you already are the self. So if we can get rid of the extra baggage that we're carrying, that's really what kind of happens. It's I think one of the things that Ramana used to use, when people get on the train, once you realize you're on the train, you can take the luggage off your head and put it down. You don't have to carry the weight once you realize that you're not this character that has to carry all this luggage. So.
Yeah, that's like putting down the actual mask.
Right. So that's one of the advantages of self-knowledge. I'm glad you used the word knowledge, because it is a knowingness. But the things that we think that we know, a lot of times we have to at least suspend our belief long enough to make a fresh and clean inquiry. And that's pretty difficult, especially if we really think that we know something.
Teachers and teachings are very accessible. Mm-hmm. Anyone who has a computer can do a Google search, and you can find in any country now someone doing satsang.
Right. Well, I would love to see, like every Sunday there'd be at least as many people holding satsang as there are, Christian ministers throughout the world holding Sunday services. I think it would be wonderful if it's everywhere. This whole idea that there's scarcity of realization of the self, is an idea I think that could easily be dropped. We could just... I know Nisargadatta said that if you can help people, if you find yourself where you can be of assistance to people, I like that word better than help, because it doesn't, it's, I assist you in getting what you want, not help you get what I think you should have.
It seems like Nisargadatta's life was kind of more open, especially for Westerners coming through at that time.
Right.
A lot of them, I think, were coming also from having been with Osho.
Yes, and the same is true with Papaji, of course, as well. He got the fallout, when Osho dropped the body, everybody showed up in Lucknow to see Papaji.
So there's this really strong impulse to have a living teacher for anyone that's seeking. There's this attraction to finding the guru in the physical form, and then spending as much time in the presence of that teacher to kind of absorb that energy or presence.
Right. I see it more as a mirroring, if the person is clear enough that he's not running an agenda on you. Well, naturally we mirror each other, in our interactions, and perhaps, your attention can reflect back on itself, and you'll just know yourself just through that mirroring. I refuse to basically believe in the reality of the teacher as being something separate or special. I think it's a function. I think the guru is a function. It's just like all the other functions that these bodies do. Although I think it's the highest function. That a body can serve.
I never met Ramana in person in that way in a lifetime, or maybe I have, but in this lifetime I haven't. And because the resonance with his teaching is so strong, I've never had that feeling towards anyone to that level. I mean, I can feel and see God or the guru or consciousness in everyone I meet. Right. And I can connect with that. I can connect right now with you from your presence, and I can feel you being established in this moment, in this beingness, and I can connect as that being the guru.
Right.
But there's no particular attachment to your form that's carrying that.
Beautiful.
I may never see you again.
Beautiful. Yeah.
There's an appreciation though for whatever you're presenting. Just by being you, I feel it, and then I feel that there is assistance.
Right.
Because it's a calming presence.
Right. Yeah, with a lot of gurus, there'll be a big scandal that will show up, and then people will get caught up in the whole personality. And this guru's bad, this one's good, this one has this foible or fault. And I'm basically saying, that if the publisher's clearinghouse van showed up in your front yard and the guy came up with a big check and gave it to you for $1 million, would you really worry that much about the personal life of that fellow that's giving you the check? Giving you this very good news that you are that, for instance, or would you just say, oh, I can't accept that check, it's obviously bogus, I mean, you couldn't possibly bear it because I've heard things about you. No, you just take the check, I think. or almost everybody would. And that's the way this is, you know. It's basically an invitation to self-inquiry. It's not that the guru is going to do it for you. He's going to bring your attention to bear on what's possible.
Well, in that sense, satsang is going on everywhere.
I would never refuse an opportunity to sit in the catbird seat, you know, just out of the possibility that someone would, you know, it would resonate in such a way that there would be some value, you know, that would occur out of it, you know. The value being that someone would be moved to gain an interest in self-inquiry and maybe, you know, disabuse himself, or him or herself, you know, of some of the mistaken ideas we have of who we are, and maybe to the point where that there's enough clearing that who one really is will just become self-evident. You know, it's just that we get caught up in our imagination of who we are, and take that to be the truth of who we are. In fact, with a lot of the New Age stuff, you know, where people are trying to convince us sometimes that the reality that we're imagining is real. You know, that we're actually imagining a reality. We're actually, you know, I don't believe that. I believe that what we are is not imagination, but that what we normally take ourselves to be is what we imagine ourselves to be.
Do you find that there's an actual final death of that imaginary self, or a dissolving of it?
Well, you know, I've always taken the whole thing about, you know, with reincarnation and the umpteen million lifetimes. I think every time there's an I thought, there's an I is being born, the idea of me is being born with the word I. And then when attention's no longer on that, there's the death. So yeah, a million times during the day, there's a life, you know, each new little lifetime of an I thought, you know, coming up to the level of attention and then dropping away.
But
So,
my understanding from Ramana's teachings is that self-realization is the permanent absence of that thought rising.
right.
That it no longer comes up.
Right. Well, if you're here now, then time, the whole idea of time has to do with the ego. We almost generally, you know, and absolutely, we take now, we've demoted now to be just a moment in time. And I posit that, I guess I assert basically that time is basically mind. And that the now that we are, we're not somebody that's trying to be here now or is doing, we're actually now itself. And that in the time and all, which is basically the measurement of movement, that all the movement is happening through now. Our basic experience is just nowness, you know. I mean, subjectively, it's always now. So, I mean, this has been, you know, the whole now thing has been beat to death. But it's like we think that we're someone that needs to be here, as if there's somewhere other than here. And we have to do it now, as if it's not always now.
That's a clear seeing and a clear recognition of what is. But what I am looking at is that there's still something resonating in me when I see Ramana's life, because there was no personal selfishness in it. Like, someone could reach a state of freedom. Now, and then what do they do with their time? They go surf all day, and then they go hang out and make love to beautiful women. But they're not someone that, to me, is resonating as a life that consciousness itself is living in service to itself. How does that serve the collective if I go surf for 10 hours? That might be all my own mind stuff and judgments.
Only you can determine that. I'm not gonna label it, but Nisargadatta, boiled it down. He was asked that question many times, and he just said, "You'll do the needful. Just do the needful. It'll become apparent in each moment.
I'm just expressing also the Dalai Lama. I resonate with teachers that I see that are clearly being of service and acting in the utmost humility.
Right.
Thich Nhat Hanh, they're not out doing things to celebrate their own vanity in any way. The absence of vanity is happening in the beings that we resonate the most as being egoless. We're talking about the death of the ego. Well, the total death of it, then that means there's complete absence of vanity. And that seems to be very rare, even amongst all of the realized beings that are giving satsang.
Right.
Is that my perception, or is that reality?
Well, from a very early age, we're taught to imagine ourselves in a certain way. When we raise our children, what do we want them to do? We want them to have a positive self-image, don't we? What does that mean? That we're going to imagine ourselves in a certain way. We imagine Ramana was a certain way. If you look at some of Prem Ananda's tapes, he was talking to a fellow named James Swartz, and I guess Ramana actually had a temper. And it really wasn't, we know Papaji had a temper, we know that Nisargadatta had one, but Ramana? And it turned out that evidently there were times when he actually did basically, the bile rose in him a little bit. The man died in 1950. I was 9 years old. I didn't hear anything about him until later. I don't have an actual experience of being in the presence of the physical body of Ramana to see how it operated in the world, or Jesus, or the Buddha, or any of the other ones.
Have there been some?
So why should I buy into all of this secondhand information and get caught up in that? It's a little bit like what we were talking about when the camera was off, this whole thing of falling in love with the finger that's pointing at the moon. Ramana did say, an awful lot about the death of the ego. And a lot of people talk about vigilance and earnestness in the search for self-inquiry. I know in my case, for whatever it's worth, that all that was required was a willingness to have the truth be the truth, and not necessarily agree with what I thought the truth should be. It's like, trying to skew what the experience of all these teachers and their teaching and everything should be, based on learned prejudices about what's good and what's bad. Like it's bad to be angry, for instance. I can't imagine an angry Ramana, can you? And I don't know whether he got it, whether that was just hearsay too. It could be inaccurate. Everything that we get secondhand has the possibility of being inaccurate.
Yeah, for me, it can get into a lot of stories, and then that becomes imagination as well, and it's kind of a distraction from inquiry anyway. To look at anyone in that way. I just know that the seriousness of it for me is that without Ramana and his teachings, I'd either be in prison or dead right now.
Yeah. Oh,
that's just how I feel in terms of the experience of this life.
I'm very grateful for Ramana Maharshi for that form to show up in this way. I could never have figured it out on my own. I needed teachers.
You recently went to Tiruvannamalai, to Arunachala. Can you talk about the impact of being there at the mountain?
I've been going to Arunachala since 1999, since November of 1999. And I still cannot look at that mountain. I know this isn't very non-dualistic or Advaitic, but without having to push my head down. Just there's a lot of stories I could attribute that to, or qualities I could, of the mountain that I could attribute that to. But I just know that there's a humbling that happens there you know, if I sit on my front porch and look at the mountain, you know, I just can't, you know, I can't just like dominate it and turn it into an experience, you know, it pushes my head down.
In your experience, have you seen
Right.
that the characteristics that are a consequence of thinking you're a person, once you stop
Right.
identifying, do they just go away or do they still linger?
Well, sometimes it's kind of interesting, you know, and awkward, you know, the way things unfold. I can remember when in 1997 I had a stroke, and I was living down in Camarillo, and I was working in Van Nuys as a manager in a brewery, and it was a very high pressure job, and my blood pressure had gone completely through the roof, and basically my brainstem blood supply got a bit of a test, you know, a pressure test, and it failed, and I was clear down on my right side and everything. In the process of recovering from that, I came up to see John here, who was living here in Ojai, and at the time he was showing Gangaji tapes. And I had been interested in spirituality back in the 70s, but I kind of gave it up in favor of just working and making money, pretty much, for, you know, like, you know, several years, you know, a long time. Basically, when I started watching those tapes, you know, I can remember that Gangaji was talking about vigilance. And, you know, self-inquiry was really difficult for me because I kept asking, who am I? And I couldn't get a good answer. And I didn't realize that perhaps no answer at all might be the answer I was looking for, but I didn't consider that as one of the possibilities. At the same time, I started feeling this bliss. You know, she started talking about vigilance, and I said, yeah, vigilance sounds like a good idea. I didn't come up with the idea that, oh boy, I'm going to practice vigilance, I'm going to be vigilant now. But it was like the vigilance just kind of showed up. You know, I was willing to be vigilant, you know, whatever that was. And I started feeling this bliss and this joy that came up. And I say for a 6-month period, as I was recovering from the brain attack, my jaws were actually hurting because I was smiling all the time. I think they call, in spiritual parlance, they call it, you know, like being a bliss bunny or a bliss ninny or whatever. I was just completely, like for 6 months in bliss. But over the top of that, if any circumstance or situation threatened my bliss, and I really want to accent the word my bliss, because the ego was taking, as fast as the bliss would show up, the ego was taking ownership of it. I would get angry to the point where I thought that anger was going to spill over into a physical expression of it. I was really worried. And I went to see Yukio Ramana, because usually I had myself under such control that wouldn't be a possibility, but this anger was anger, you know.
Like that it could lead to violence.
It could lead to violence if someone threatened this bliss that I had grabbed and was hanging on to. And at the time I was big and strong and weighed 270 pounds, and you know, it was...
Could be dangerous.
Yeah, it could be very dangerous, you know, it could be very much a life-altering thing. In late 1999, Ramana came to town, Japanese-American Ramana came to town, and he was doing what he called a radical awakening process and with people. And basically, it's a guided visual, you know, self-inquiry. Won't get into the details of the process, but it was enough to realize that I was getting my attention mirrored back into myself, you know, in the process, you know, and you don't know, but in that process, it was like I had an explosion. I thought maybe like another stroke. You know, when I looked back into myself, when my attention was looked back into myself, it was like an explosion. And this experience is like I was looking back at where they invented nothing. you know, or where black was invented. You know, there was no, it was just a vastness. And it only happened for like a split second or so. But it was like identity seemed to drop away at the same time, and it was just a direct experience, and anything I say about it's just going to be a story about it. But what I noticed is that bliss dropped away. But it was replaced, well, I can't even say replaced. What remained was this silent awareness. It's ineffable. There's nothing can be said about it. And there was a peace, I think, in the Bible Jesus talked about, that surpasseth all understanding. And this peace has never really gone away. There might be surface, you know, stuff on the waves, but that anger was gone. And what remains is just simply this. This is all about knowledge, but it isn't knowledge in the normal sense of the word. Because in the normal sense of the word knowledge, when we know something, we objectify it, and then we identify it based on qualities that we observe in whatever it is that we're looking at, including ourselves. That which one is completely prior to experience. Basically, from what I was speaking of earlier, you know, that was basically what happened. And then for the 10 years that followed, why, there's just this gradual breaking up of the beliefs and the loosening up and the relaxing into the certainty that one is whole and complete. And sometimes things don't fall away in a logical sequence, so it can be kind of funny the way one gets disabused of the belief systems that have been heavily, you know, believed in for decades, in my case.
But so now it's like you said, there's a peacefulness that's present, right, regardless of what's on the surface.
Right, and it's that was what showed itself, was that peaceful, just ineffable isness that doesn't move or change.
Which is now.
Is reality.
It's happening now,
yeah.
All the time it is.
And again, it's not that I'm someone that's in the now, you know, getting more and more here now. It's just the unceasing discovery that I'm now itself and everything that now contains.
And then you recently found out that you had cancer? Is that a new...
Well, actually, that happened in 2007, the first time I was at stage 4 with an abdominal lymphoma, right in the middle of my small intestine. I had a surgery and chemotherapy and got about 3 years cancer-free. And in 2010 it was discovered that it came back. I discovered that when I came back from India. And it went through stem cell transplant in 2010. And then this year when I came back at the end of April, I discovered it was back again. And this time it's, you know, stage 4 again. And I think we've given up looking for a cure, so to speak, and we're just doing maintenance right now. So when I talk about me and my cancer and this and that and everything, I'm talking about the body.
Right.
Yeah.
Time shows you a story,
Right.
and your birth is part of it.
Right. Yeah, it's just part of the tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury signifying nothing. Yeah. A little bit of Macbeth in there.
How do you feel, Doc, about Bob being with you? You guys have been friends a long time, huh?
Well, it's a deepening of my experience of not being here, of letting go of, and this room has been anathema for me because it's filled with mites that I'm sensitive to. So I'm sitting here, mites are swarming all over my body, biting me, and I'm just totally letting go of them. And in the process, there's a kind of a heat. I feel a heat.
Right.
And the mites are disappearing.
Wow.
The quote unquote.
Well, Rumi used to say, I want burning, right?
Yeah,
I want burning. So you're getting your burning.
I'm getting my burning.
Right. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. But then someone else will tell you eventually that, well, if you don't get the burning, it means you're not really enlightened.
Well, there's a lot of talk about
Right.
everyone's already enlightened.
Right.
Because there's only the one self,
Yeah.
and it is already realized, so there's nothing to do.
That's right.
But if that's just held on a conceptual level,
Right.
it's just a belief. It's not a direct experience.
That's right.
So to me, the whole racket is staying in the direct experience without falling into the concept about it.
Yes. Yeah, and but the ego keeps, the egoic construct seems to arrogate to itself the idea that it's the doer of this life, and that's something that can be part of the inquiry. What's really living these bodies? Is the thoughts about the body, is that what's living them? I suggest that we look a little further than that, a little deeper than that.
Me, it's interesting to be so young and to be sitting in this so comfortably. Like when I was 17, I had not a clue of if I was sitting in this conversation, it would just be noises that meant nothing.
Yeah, it's sometimes weird being in like social situations and finding myself completely outside of them. Like walking around at school, I feel like I'm millions of years older than anyone there, even the teachers.
Yeah.
And so I have trouble finding like authenticity in my experiences because I'm hanging out with kids who get excited about things, excited about life and excited about their friends and what's happening. And to me, I know that it's nothing because when you die, it all goes away. There's no importance in anything. When I die, I don't make it to court the next day. I don't see my wife. All these things that you think are very important, if anything, will be taken away with death, and and that death can happen right now.
Yeah.
Without the death of the body, the death of the person can happen right now.
Are you excited about nothing?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited about dying.
I'm curious about dying.
I am so curious.
I felt like I was some kind of a monster, when my mother died, and I went into the room, and she just died like a couple of minutes before. I went out of the room, and she died, and I came back in, and she was just there, dead, What changed? I'm still curious about that. What's going on? Whatever made her mother, my mother and everything, it was no longer condensed in that body. It was no longer identifiable, as I'd identified it for years in that body.
Yeah.
And what happened? What's really happened? Did anything really happen? When Ramana was passing, there was devotees were all around the ashram, and they were wailing and crying and lamenting. And he said, "What's the big fuss?" Ramana asked, "What's the big fuss?" And the people said, "Well, Ramana, they're sad and they're in real distress because you're leaving them." And he said, "Well, where could I go? Where could I go?
Plus, it's like
I'm always with you."
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
if you know, it's not like you can actually know someone in a way that makes any difference if they're actually there or not. If you know Ramana and then he dies, don't you still know the same Ramana without the body?
Right.
It's not as if him being there actually makes a difference. It's like just an idea that you're holding in yourself of him.
Right. Exactly.
You're
You know,
imagining
and
there's
then
another.
whatever idea that we're used to holding about someone when they're sitting there staring into space, you know, and there's no longer any recognition or movement, that there's a whole shift in our experience of whatever that was, and it can be a little disconcerting, I guess, you know, and confusing. But the word Ramana, the name Ramana, the word means that which lives in the heart of all being. You know, so it's Ramana wasn't that body, you know, and you're not that body. You know. But me telling you that, or Ramana telling you that, the best we can hope if we accept that is just a new belief system. Oh, now this week I'm not the body. But if you actually see for a fact that that this body is just showing up, you know, phenomenally within the steady, unmoving presence that one is, then that's useful. That's valuable knowledge. It's an interesting poem we could close with. It's a poem by Rumi, and basically the name of the poem is this. There are two people mentioned in the poem. Halaj, which was a fellow that followed Rumi around. He was a scribe that wrote down everything that Rumi said, I guess, that was of use. And then a fellow by the name of Halaj Mansour, who was martyred back in 13th century Turkey, I guess, for saying "I am truth" around the wrong people. But the poem goes something like this. This we are now is not imagination. This is not grief or joy. It's not a judging state, or an elation, or sadness. Those come and go. This is the presence that doesn't. It's dawn whose song, here in the splendor of coral, inside the friend, the simple truth of what Halaj said. What more could human beings want? When grapes turn to wine, they're wanting this. And when the night sky pours by, it's really a crowd of beggars, and they all want some of this. This that we are now creates these bodies, cell by cell, like bees building a honeycomb. The human body in the universe grows from this, not this from the human body in the universe. This we are now is not imagination. This is not grief or joy, not a judging state, or an elation or sadness. Those come and go. This is the presence that doesn't. Thank you.